Frank O'Donnell, who you all know, please take off.
Thank you very much. First, I will just very briefly begin by thanking Nizami Ganjavi International Center and the World Academy of Art and Science. I started coming to the Global Baku Forum in 2015. I've been, I think, almost every year since. And I found it an extraordinary opportunity as a student of the world and of humanity to listen to others and to gain insights from them and to think. And I wrote a little book about it, which was shared at the Interaction Council in Valletta. It was called Desperate Hope, Survival Pathways for Human Civilization. It brought me to realize, based on everything we've been saying for the better part of a decade plus here in Baku, that we have one civilization in this world. We have many cultures, but we have one, for the first time, truly globalized civilization. And this is the result not only of the creation of the United Nations, but very especially of the digital revolution and the way in which media and the news and communications travel rapidly across the world. And as Prime Minister Juthe has said, it is something which is here to stay. It is a causal factor in the global turbulence. But this turbulence is also dynamism, from which we can yield fruits that bring us forward to the future. Now, you will forgive my mental plasticity of being unable to see clearly the obvious conclusions from so many debates, because I keep thinking of these things. But I also remember being myself a child of the United Nations, having spent some of my childhood in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, in Palestine, in Israel. I have seen war begin there. In fact, my father's replacement as a UN peacekeeper was killed in the Golan Heights in 1967, and I joined the UN for 32 years. So it was very much in my DNA. But I remember from my early years in the UN in the 1970s, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, who were admired in many quarters, but in my memory were also responsible for a major attack on the United Nations and the credibility of the institution. In essence, they started a process which for the past 50 years has led to repeated loss of confidence in the United Nations, for various good reasons sometimes, but also for bad reasons. And the financial crises which we are facing go back 50 years. I remember a financial crisis when I landed in the ground in Sudan in the 1970s, and there were others that came since. And I am of the belief that we don't need to be trying to do more with less and less and less and less, but we need to have a vision, as Tatiana Valavaya said, which allows us to empower the system more and empower the instruments of international creation and construction that we have been building to be more effective and to enable more enforcement of their norms and standards. Now, basically, I have, of course, prepared a number of points, and I hope that my mobile phone will put them together. But as is typical of our technology, these things scupper you towards the end of the day. The survival of our first planetary civilization hinges on preserving the universal values that are enshrined in the Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and all of the things that have tried to move from the idealism of the Charter to the implementation. So we're talking about the targets, we're talking about, for the first time, the Millennium Declaration, which was the first unanimous expression of these things, to the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, and on to the Pact to the Future. We must preserve this, keep it, while addressing the structural deficiencies in global governance. And I would say that we talked about the middle corridor in terms of energy in Azerbaijan. We need more such connectivity, not just to depend on one route, but multiple routes. And this question of maximizing connectivity into a fabric of resilience is the thing that will help us heal when the holes are blown and the threads are unraveled by things like the war in Iraq. Let us also consider ourselves to be pre-truth and not post-truth. We have had mythology and propaganda since time immemorial. But now with the global connectivity of science and the media, we can use AI to verify facts and advance truth. And I think that the values, the principles, the obligations of international law, including international humanitarian law, the Charter, UDHR, should be injected into the global governance of AI and the design of the large language models that are becoming the architecture and algorithms for artificial intelligence. This will help us orient independent media towards authentic reporting and accurate analysis. A third point I want to make has to do with violence and conflict. Ending violence requires interruption and compassion, as Kailash Satyarthi has been explaining to us. Conflict and violence must be prevented and treated like epidemics, and I'm sure Tedros would probably agree to some extent with that were he here. Now, one of the people who's been very active in the peacemaking reflection group that I co-founded a few years ago is Dr. Gary Slutkin, who has just published a book, The End of Violence, Experiences in the USA, Latin America, Europe, and Africa on political violence, mass shootings, war, community violence, and violence against women, showing how epidemic control strategies are reducing violence dramatically in several communities to zero and for others to record lows. And this has an awful lot to do with compassion and interruption. So I would commend this book to be read and this approach to be studied as an effective way to addressing conflict resolution. Next, I would say women's empowerment and equality represents the greatest and fastest path to civic emancipation, human rights, and social progress. We should not forget UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which had to specifically deal with the role of women in conflict prevention and in peace building. It is not enough to have women leaders. We need women's networks to bring about systemic change and global governance, as I tried to share with former Prime Minister of Finland, who was a member of the Council of Women World Leaders. The Council needs to be more active, and we need more women's groups involved in global governance as alternative pathways to deal with problems such as migration, humanitarian solutions for the dispossessed, and so on. Next, I would just simply say unity is strength. If you look at the history of activism by networks of former leaders, such as Nazami Ganjavi, the Club de Madrid, the Elders, the Interaction Council that I've been marginally involved in, we have not yet acted in unison. It's good that there's a cooperation between the World Academy and Nazami Ganjavi. No amount of agreements, appeals, declarations had yet had a quantum effect to bring about a paradigmatic shift in multilateralism, let alone global order. Yet mass citizen appeals by Avaz and others have proven highly effective. So I would urge all of these networks of former leaders, come together to influence today's leaders, your successors in office. Come together, act together, work towards greater accountability, support the International Criminal Court, and act as a moral and legal conscience for the world. And on UN reform, multilateralism is not dead. This is my last point, really. But ailing and we can fix it. The UN is not dead. It is weak, it can be strengthened. The core fix is at the level of the Security Council. We've had plenty of intergovernmental framework negotiations on this. I'm not going to come up with any new ideas about it. It just needs to get done. And we can do it partly if we have the General Conference under Article 109, but we don't have to wait for that. Under Article 108 of the UN Charter, you can bring about such changes. Finally, we need a globalization of compassion and conscience, and that would be my basic point. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And for those of you who don't know it, Frank wrote a wonderful article for us, for our Cadmus Journal on this subject last year, and you need to hear more from him. We don't have the subscription addresses for many of you, but if we'll circulate a paper, and anyone who would like to receive complimentary copies of the journal on articles that might be relevant to you, we'll be happy to provide them to you. His article is really one that's worth reading. Thank you, Frank.